All right. So today I'm just going to talk about setting up a project in Visual Studio to do some development in Civil 3D or AutoCAD. Honestly, I didn't prepare very much for this because I just got a new laptop and I only just put all the new software or all of my software back on it this week. So let me just jump straight into it. Get rid of that. I'm going to open up Visual Studio. If you don't have Visual Studio installed already, you're going to want to go download it from Microsoft. They have a website, visualstudio.microsoft.com/downloads. Visual Studio Community is a free download. You can get the Professional Enterprise, but you're probably never going to need it. This one is much more powerful than the Express versions that they used to give us for free. I find that it works pretty much for everything I need. You don't have to do a whole lot of jumping through hoops to get it to debug in AutoCAD anymore. So if you want to go download it, you'll go to Microsoft's website, just click the free download. It'll bring you to the download page. It'll just start downloading their little installer. Okay. So once you have it installed, it's got a newer interface if you've ever used the ones before. I was until this week on 2017, so this is much different even for me. I'm trying to get used to it too. You'll want to create a new project, which will be down here on the right, and you want to make sure two things: which language you want to write in, so either Visual Basic or Visual C# are the most common ones. And then you want to make sure you're using the .NET framework. So they have, when you install it, depending on the settings and options you put in, this could be a longer list. Like if we were to just change it to all languages, it's a really long list of potential project types. Since I went through here already and picked the one I want, it'll remember the last couple you used. I'm going to work with the C# .NET framework. Again, as I learned this morning, you want to make sure it's the .NET framework because they default to .NET Standard and Core at the top, and you don't want to just come pick those. Those don't really compile with the AutoCAD API. Once you've selected your class, well, you also want to make sure it's a class library. Got to remember that part too. So select your class library, .NET framework, click next. It'll prompt you for a project name or where you want to save it to. I tend to put everything on my external hard drive so I can carry it home with me. And for 2019, that's the Civil 3D I'm using. I think the framework is 4.7, but you could use a later version and it should still work. You can always change that later. And I like to place the solution and project in the same directory. Otherwise, you're going to end up with, like in the root folder right here, you would end up with a file that points to everything inside of a subfolder. I just like to keep it all together in one place. So it's going to go through, it'll create a blank project. That gives you a blank class with minimal settings. And if you're not familiar with programming at all, there are a few key terms you want to stick with or want to learn. Everything is broken down into namespaces, which is, the analogy I came up with in an AutoCAD side is your drawing. It would be your namespace, where everything in your drawing, like the objects in it, the lines, p-lines, text, would be a class. The class would be something that you can act upon. Like in AutoCAD, you can move your line. That would be something you can act upon in Visual Studio is you can create a method or a property that does something to or extracts information from your class. Now, once you have your template started up, you need to go through and add in a couple of references in order to be able to access the AutoCAD API. So over here on the right, under your Solution Explorer, you have properties and references. On the references, you'll want to right-click, select Add Reference. And if it's the first time you've created a project, you won't have anything listed here. I just happened to go through here this morning and dug these up because I can never remember where they are. But they're the base files that you need to access the API are all in the program files, AutoCAD or Autodesk, AutoCAD, whatever version you're using. And you'll want the AC managed, the AC core managed, the AEC base managed, AC database managed, and the AECC database managed files. Each of these are going to give you access to different parts of what you can do to AutoCAD. The two with the AEC in there are Civil 3D specific, but the other three are basically anything you're going to need to access AutoCAD by itself. Once you've selected and added all these to your project, click OK, and they should be listed over here now. The next thing you need to do is go through and select them all and change the copy local to false, because otherwise whenever you compile your program, it's going to make a copy of those files and put them in the folder with your program, and you don't want to have to redistribute these files with the program you're writing, because then you're just duplicating information. Sometimes it won't even run properly because your file is calling these files that are in a different location that AutoCAD is already running. Because if AutoCAD's already running them, it can't load them in. So it kind of creates a little cross-referencing nightmare inside your code. So it's just a great step. Just make sure you turn copy local false off when you first bring them in, and you won't have to worry about it again. Essentially, once you have your references in, you are done with that. If you're going to develop something more intense, you can always come back and add more references. There's some really good ones out there. I use the ones for JSON files a lot. The next step, once you've gotten your references in, is you want to set your properties in order to make this a project that'll run in AutoCAD. So I just double-clicked on properties. It brought me to the application settings and properties pages. At this point, you can make changes, all this. I leave it all default for a little while until I figure out what it is I'm writing and what it's going to become. First thing you really want to do is come down to your build. Make sure you're setting this up for what you're building for. Like right now, I have it as an any CPU, means it'll run on a 32 or 64-bit machine. But I'm also getting these little warnings down here about that specific thing. So if I were to change that to 64, those little warnings will go away, which most computers now are running 64. There's no point compiling to a 32-bit machine unless you're still on those. And then you can just follow through these steps. I usually just hit each one, but I don't normally have to add anything. The biggest one you want to add to is on the debug. This is where you're going to define how your program is going to run while you're trying to test it. So because this is a class library, it needs to be loaded into AutoCAD. But in order to debug, you also have to load AutoCAD in order to load this into through Visual Studio. So you're going to tell Visual Studio that you're going to load a program. You can either browse to AutoCAD, or if you have your icon handy, you can just go in there and grab the path to it, which is really helpful if you want to run your program the exact same way you run AutoCAD normally at work, because then you can also come back to that icon and take all the rest of your load settings and just pass them to AutoCAD normally as command line arguments. This way you're getting exactly what your working environment's going to be for testing. At this point, you don't really need to go through the rest of these. Resources are things like icons and images that you want to add in. So if you're going to get fancy with like your help dialogues, you'll want to add some information in here. Services, I've never used this before, so I couldn't really speak to it. Settings, if you want to use variables that you want to store in the program that someone could use, like a path you want them to always remember, but you also want them to be able to change, you would store it in settings. Because I don't have anything in here already, it'll have a blank page. Reference paths, I don't think I've ever used this one either. And I've used signing once. This is basically just to make a Windows think your application is a certified. You have to go generate a certificate and a little bit of overhead. It just helps if you're making an application for Windows as opposed to just AutoCAD. So you don't really have to worry about this either. So again, the big things are making sure your debug settings are affixed to your AutoCAD so that when you run your program by clicking the start button up here, it'll run AutoCAD so that you can load in and test. I'm going to save this, click close. So now I'm coming back to my code, and this is really the first major step you're going to take into working on your program. Let me go steal my sample code. Except, oh, there it is. First thing you want to do is really replace all that code. I'm going to paste all this in here. Let's go through this line by line, really. If you're not familiar with coding, we're basically going to reference a bunch of other APIs in order to build off of them. And so in C# environment, you're going to use a using statement. We're telling our program that we're going to use the system API, and then we're going to also use the Autodesk AutoCAD runtime APIs. This is going to allow us to create a new application, because this is where this extension application interface is stored. And this is what tells AutoCAD what an application is and how it can run. In order for you to have an application, you have to have, it has to inherit this, and it has to have these two methods in it in order for it to run. And these two methods will tell AutoCAD what to do when it loads up and when it's killed by the system. By default, my code throws in here that a little error, because you can put your own code in here, but if you don't put anything in here, it'll just pass through. So this is just basically to tell me that it's worked. If I were to run this, it would throw a little error message down here when I loaded it into AutoCAD, but I don't want that to happen. I'm just going to comment that out so I don't have to worry about it. I'll do the same for this one. All right, so now I have the framework for building a new application. At this point, I usually just do like almost every programmer, and I just come in here and throw in a new command that I can type in AutoCAD. Basic one that everyone uses is the hello world. And in this, we're looking at a command method that AutoCAD has provided to us through their API that we pass back to AutoCAD. And basically the text right here is what we would type in our command line. So at our command line, we would type hello world. The code's going to call this method called hello world, and it'll run whatever we put in this code. And I'm just going to throw in my little sample text here that's basically going to say, we're going to make a call to document manager of the current document, the editor, and we're going to write the message hello world. but I'm also getting this error message over here. And this is one of the huge benefits of writing code through Visual Studio is it'll give you real-time information on your errors of your code. So like in this instance, application doesn't exist because right now I'm only calling system and I'm calling runtime. An application doesn't exist in either of those. Now Visual Studio will actually tell me that there are other ways to fix this. By clicking the show or the fix solutions button, it'll give me a couple of options. And unfortunately, you'd have to kind of know what's in each API code piece in order to know where you want to look to. But I just know that the application I want specifically is in application services. So I can have Visual Studio just add a using statement for me for application services. As an alternative, I could have actually just taken that whole line of code and placed it right here, and it would still run. And since I only have this one line of code, I'm only calling that whole segment this one time. You generally want to put it up here because you're going to use it more than once in most applications. So I'm going to put that back, and then I'm pretty much done with the very first sample to make sure my project is set up. And now I want to test it to make sure I set it up right. So come up here, make sure this is on debug, which usually it's on the defaulted debug. Click start, and it's going to just run AutoCAD. So we have to wait for it to start up. Sometimes you're going to get a little exception here where it's trying to load something out of the AutoCAD folders. I generally just uncheck this and just let it keep going. Have to hit continue so it'll keep loading. And this is the process you have to deal with every time you're writing a program, is waiting on AutoCAD to load. So if you can bare bones your AutoCAD installation, it'll probably run a little faster. All right, so now that I'm all loaded up, in order to access the code I just wrote, I need to load it into AutoCAD. Now we could have written the code to where it would auto load itself in, but for introduction, we're just going to go with the netload command. I'm going to go look for the one I just wrote. So I'm using class library 4, binary folder, debug. The DLL file that it just made is based on the class on your project name that you've given it. So it's going to load in this very familiar, oh, this might not be a trusted file. You can hit always load or load once. It doesn't really matter because you're going to get this every time. Every time that DLL is rewritten and updated, AutoCAD thinks it's a new file. So you could say always load, but you're still going to get this message. So load once, and then I can type at the command line, hello world. And it prompts back hello world, which is exactly what I told it to do. It's just tell me hello world. At this point, all I've done is verify that my code works. I don't care that I'm still in AutoCAD. I want to go back to coding. Just come back over to Visual Studio and I'll just stop my debugging. That will completely kill the AutoCAD session, so it's no longer there. And then you can go right back to writing whatever you want to write. Any questions so far? No, don't see any. And kind of apologize because I didn't really have enough time to plan to go beyond that with a more extensive sample of how to write something. I was just going to show some other stuff that I have written, kind of to give some good examples of some projects, of what you can do with something. Let's see. Let's go to this one. So this one I wrote several years ago in Visual Basic. Oh, wrong one. So I was writing in Visual Basic when I started out. It is a kind of a simpler language because it's more an English mode where you can just step through and read it more clearly. But I guess this one is broken since it's such an old version. It doesn't have all of its references. It was written for 2017. This particular project actually is a combination of projects, but I wrote, my original program was actually a little specialized leader box. The company I worked for wanted like a rectangular box with a leader that came out of the corner or corners as part of the polyline, and they wanted it all wiped out. It's took me a little while to write this. I originally wrote it in Lisp. I rewrote it in this because I wanted it to update itself and do some more complex stuff. Like this part of the code will actually write the little silhouette or draw the little silhouette. I can probably sample that in here. Like when you're drawing a line or a polyline, when you have picked a spot and you're going to the next spot and it does that little silhouette line showing you where it could go. It's what Autodesk calls a jig. And that one was probably the second hardest part of writing that, is trying to get my head around that. Let's see if I can load that without a problem. I guess I won't load. Oh, that don't work. Well, so as an example, when you're doing this, that is like a jig. You can do all kinds of really cool stuff. If you're trying to show what something would look like in my example, my box was essentially that, and my jig was this, where it would draw the box and then they would see what they were doing, how it would look before it was placed. And then once they clicked, it would update the box to trim off of that and then re-update the wipeout behind it. And then they can go back and add another leader. Before I ended up stopping on that project, I actually even was looking into some specialized overrules where you can take control of how this looks. Like all these little grips that AutoCAD gives you by default, you can actually wipe those out and do what you want with it. You don't have to make a specialized object like in Civil 3D where it has alignments and corridors that have their own grips. You can take an object and override the grip rules that it has so that you can display what you want. So in my case, I had a little plus sign here and a little minus sign, so I could delete that off and I could add another one. I just never finished it. Have too many projects going on. I was going to show y'all as well that that Autodesk has actually provided us a template for creating a Visual Studio project. Let me get you the links for that. They have a community platform for developers. So if you go to autodesk.com/developer network, I can paste a few links into the chat for y'all if you want these. But this is where a really good resource for finding information on developing for different parts of AutoCAD. So you can create, or you can go get the object arcs or the .NET type stuff. This has a little more detail on some of the older ways of programming using COM objects. .NET is pretty much where you want to go. You can actually go through here, and these are really good step-by-step trainings on how to do the basic stuff. It'll get you to making a small program. Part of what I showed you is part of one of these. They may have spread it out a little more. They even have your Lisp routine references if you need to learn more. But if you're wanting to do more .NET work, down here at the bottom, under Tools, they have wizards for object arcs and .NET. Unfortunately, because I'm running a newer Visual Studio, it won't install the .NET for my AutoCAD that I have installed. But it's if you install the correct one for the versions you're running, when you create a new project through it, it'll actually prompt you for the types of stuff you're going to add to your project, and it'll add in all your references and set up a class and namespace for you. It'll actually simplify a lot of the steps that I went through. I just don't use them because my mismatch of software has never really let me use them properly. Oh, Tom, will you please share a link showing what types of objects Civil 3D and Autodesk are accessible through .NET? Sure. So on this page, they have, pretty sure it was on here. Yeah, on the developer or reference guides. So you can go through here and select the object arcs or the ActiveX. These are all the what you can access through VBA. Object arcs, the manage.NET developer guide should have everything in here. I'm not so familiar with it that I know exactly where to click on to get to it. I usually have to click around. Let's see, probably that one. Yeah, so this lists out all the different things in each namespace. So what you have access to tells you what it is, and you can click on it and see what it's made up of and what you can do to it, all your methods. But a lot of this information is available from within Visual Studio. Like if I were to go back to Visual Studio and I wanted to find something that's inside the application context, I can just start typing. I can look inside, say, ACAD application, and I can see these are what I can do to it. Or I can go back and see all the methods that can be done to the application. Or other things that I can find inside the application. Is that kind of what you were looking for, Tom? Okay. Beyond that, that was really all I had scheduled for what I was going to talk over on this. I hope it was helpful for y'all. Hope it gave you something that you can start from. If you're interested in learning more, trying stuff out, you can always reach out to me. I'm probably in Visual Studio about a third of the amount of time I'm in AutoCAD. Like right now, I've been working on a series of tools over here. So I leave Visual Studio open on one screen while I'm working, and sometimes I'll have an idea and I'll go type to it. Let's see. So right now I'm working on this Project Explorer that will let me swap between the Civil 3D working folders and active projects internally, and at some point I'm building some extra spreadsheet linking information to it. But right now this is as far as it goes. This one took me just half a day to write. The hardest part was making sure Civil 3D works with it, because it didn't like that I was manipulating them outside of Civil 3D. But my other favorite tool is this one, where it lists out every sheet set of my server so that I don't have to go dig for it when I want to open a project in the sheet set manager. You could use, if you have basically an idea and you have an hour or two of time to test it and see if it works, I always say go for it. What's the worst you can do? Find out it didn't work and just move on. But that's a good question, Tom. Do you not have a mic today, Tom? Tom asks, could you create a DLL that would take any drawing and change all settings to change to a specific template? I would venture to guess you could. I'd have to look into exactly what settings you're wanting to change. In the past, I did one where, so one of the steps everyone, I'm sure y'all have to do it too, is set your layers for your sheets. And I wrote a pretty extensive little code that, using a settings file, it recognized what sheet you were in and went through and set all the layers for you. So all you had to do is step through the sheets. It actually, I might still have that code somewhere. It needs to be updated. But you can do something similar to that. Basically, any repetitive task you can write. Now, some of those might be better suited to Lisp. This is more suited to some of the more complex stuff that you might want to add more user interaction with. You can create your own dialog boxes. Pretty much anything that you could think of, you can probably do. I'm pretty sure the only thing you can't do is create a full-on custom object like Civil 3D objects are. You would have to write that in C++, and that's well beyond me, even though I've tried for years to learn it. It's a pretty difficult concept to learn, so I think I've given up on it at this point. Okay. That's a good issue, Tom. Says another issue he's had is fixing the correct object layer for things. Yeah. You can do that in this. Some of those you can do in just Lisp as well. Depending on what it is, you can create a reactor to get ahead of it. but if it's an after the fact thing, this could work too.
Just to explain my question a little bit to anyone else out there listening that may not understand from what I put in my question. What the user asked for is they said, hey, you know, somebody started the drawing with the default out of the box ACAD.dwt template or whatever. And then they started data referencing alignments and utility pipe networks, etc. So, you know, using the tools currently in Civil 3D, they could, you know, bring in the correct settings from the correct template, but the existing content was already on the wrong layer and using the wrong styles. And as a deref, you can't, actually like the object layer settings are fixed, you can't change them. And the only way to change them is to actually promote the network, make the changes inside the network settings and then demote it, as well as, you know, taking all the objects that are already on the wrong layer, using the wrong styles and fixing those manually. So that's why I was wondering if there would be a way to programmatically make those changes for you.
I think so. If it's, so you were saying the object itself or stuff in the style?
Well, like all the pipes were brought in and they were set to standard.
Okay.
And so they want those set to whatever they should be based on the pipe network parts list that they later brought in, which wasn't in there to begin with.
Right. I think that can be done. It'd probably take a little more thought and planning, because if it's all using one part catalog that's not relevant, you're basically going to have to write a translation from that to what you want it to be, or make them pick it as it does it for them, which would almost defeat the purpose. And then basically read out the settings that you want and apply them to each object individually. It can be done. It's probably a little labor intensive, and if it's a one-off project, then it would be less time spent to just do it manually. But if it's something that happens often, yeah, it would be great.
Yeah, if it's just a matter of changing layers, you know, the promote, demote, and then manually grabbing the pipes and the structures would be pretty simple. But, you know, if the pipe size or material, whatever, didn't exist in the standard parts list that it used, that's where I kind of was like, that's going to be a little tougher.
Right.
At that point, it's more like, is it worth the effort that you're going to have to do to change these things manually? Or are you at a point where just remove the deref and create it again from scratch with the correct settings? I think that would have been, and that was what I was suggesting was the better choice if you were early enough in the template to be able, or in the drawing process to be able to do that. Do you want to maybe talk about reactors a little bit, since they're kind of program related? Because I know I've learned about them at AU, but others may not know about how they work.
So reactors, well, okay, so yeah, reactors are more of a Lisp term. In Visual Studio world, they're called events. It's basically writing a piece of code that will react to something happening. So in Lisp, you have to write a whole function that essentially tells AutoCAD, hey, I want to react to this drawing being opened, or I want it to react to this command being run, or this command being finished running, or something like that. Then you have to write a whole bunch of code for what it's going to do in reaction to what you want it to do, or reaction to. In Visual Studio, it's a lot simpler in that you can just create your code. I don't want to look at that one. Like, you would write a piece of code, this is what I want to do, then you would write a simple statement that says, let's say application begin close all. That is an event. Let me show that again actually, so this little symbol right here says that is an event that this application throws when that happens. So in response to that, I want to do a call, begin close. Let me let it write it for me. See if that works. See, it's been a while since I've written one, but it's like 2 lines of code to tell it what Lisp would do in like 20. And then you essentially have control of what the program will do once that event happens. So in one case of what I have running on my company's machines is anytime someone tries to xref something in, it automatically changes the current layer to the layer xrefs are supposed to go onto. That way, xrefs are always on the right layer. And then when they're done, it puts it back on the original layer. Now that was done more in Lisp, but that was a really simple reactor. If you want to do something more complex, like if you've ever used the revert command on the Express tools, that doesn't work as a reactor in Lisp. They had to write that in Visual Basic, or VBA actually, to where it worked outside of the drawing, but still within AutoCAD, where it would know to close the drawing you're in, and then tell AutoCAD to reopen that drawing.
So another example could be to, let's say we go through certain steps every time we're preparing a Civil 3D drawing for, export and prep for bringing into Revit. And one of the things we do is make sure everything that's a non-Civil 3D object, or, maybe everything that is, if we're doing, we do the AutoCAD export and then take all that content and bring it down to an elevation of 0 so that it's flat for when they bring it in. So that could be a good case where you could write the process within .NET, and then you could just run the program instead of having to do all those things manually. Is that correct?
Right. You could do that. It would give you more control over what's happening in the steps, because then you could say, okay, I want it to explode these types of objects. I want it to flatten everything. I want it to move this or this to a layer, or remove this kind of information. And you could just run one command and have it do all of that. And it would be very specific to your company, because you wrote it as a program that can't be edited by anyone but you, because it has to be compiled and then has to be loaded into AutoCAD. Unlike Lisp, where you can edit it because it's a text file, this is something that only you can edit once it's been published. Gives you a little more control over it, gives you more flexibility, and a lot more functionality. But again, some of that stuff can be done in Lisp. It's really a matter of what you know and how fast you can get it done.
Thank you, Adam.
Yep. Does anybody else have any questions, or do you even have any ideas for an app that you think you might want to try to write for your own use or your company use?
Yeah, I've been wanting to write one for pipes, mainly for structures, to make sure they're on the alignment and not hanging off the alignment.
That is a great one. I would love to see that too.
I've been trying to do it for years, but Visual Studio was a little more daunting than just the VBA that I did back for LDD 15 years ago.
Well, it is, but if you're used to VBA, Visual Studio is not that big of a difference if you go to Visual Basic.
Yeah, I just need to learn the programs. I am installing Visual Studio 2019 so I can possibly get started on it again.
Yeah, because Visual Basic is probably the easiest language to transition from Lisp.
Right.
If you're used to Lisp, the biggest hurdle for me was getting my head around object-oriented programming, because you don't have that in Lisp. Well, you can. I made some objects just to help myself learn, but it doesn't really lend itself to that. And it's a whole new way of thinking.
Yeah, I like to make my pipes all one big network with multiple alignments. And the new 2021 actually has pipe runs for pressure pipes, which if it translates eventually to gravity networks, that might be handy. But for now, I'd like something that I can have it go through and look at all of the pipe structures and see which alignment they're on and set the alignment to that, the structure to that alignment.
Yeah. I've got one that I've been wanting to write similar to that, but it's more about naming. So I like all my structures and pipes to be sequential along the alignment, and I like them all to be assigned to their alignment. So I wanted them to figure that out on their own, because if you add a couple of structures in the middle, that's going to throw off the naming.
Then you can name your manhole numbers and everything.
Yep.
Because I put my manhole the manhole numbers is my name, and then I use that in my label.
Right.
Because that makes it easy to coordinate between plan and profile.
I'll tell you another great one that I've actually written, but it doesn't work because of my change in software versions, is taking the output tables from storm sewers or SSA and just converting that into the HDL information directly in pipe network without having to do the re-import of the actual pipe network.
That would be handy.
Because I like that you can add the HDL, but I want to see both 125. So I commandeered the EGL line for that. And that's
what I've done.
how I show it. And right now you end up overwriting one or the other. So I wrote that. Basically input, read in the table and just assign those values to the pipes. That one was probably my favorite before I left my last firm. I have it still, but I need to update it.
Yeah, I'd be interested to see that.
Sounds like we need to add a channel to Discord.
Yeah, I got a lot of code that I could share out. Like, I started writing stuff way back in 2007 or 8, so this is stuff from back then. But everything I write, I just dump into one DLL, so it's one big project. And I started separating it out into mini projects. But I don't even remember where that other one was for the, oh, that one right there. So yeah, so I had a different exported file from, well, we were using Pond Packet back, or Stormcad. And so the output from that, we selected it. Then I could pick whatever pipe network was in my drawing and I would apply. I could even resize if they changed the update or the design in Stormcad. But it was not too bad, I think. Oh, I guess, yeah. Let's see. Look at the code. Yeah, it wasn't a whole mess of code compared to some of the other stuff I've written. This one was basically a whole lot of looping to edit one thing or another. I think the inputting the table data was the bigger headache, was to make sure it was the right format. I really needed to write it so that it was more, oh, we could pick this or that column, but I kind of hard coded that in there. But I'd be willing to share out this project if you want. Let people try some stuff out. I could share it up on the Discord. All right.
Sorry, I had to do that.
That's just funny because it shows like this giant thumb that's almost as big as your head on that.
Yeah, I saw that.
All right. So if we don't have anything else, I guess we're coming to the end of the meeting, the end of the hour.
Any suggestions on future meeting topics?
Yeah, it'd be great if someone other than me had some suggestions.
We do have some offers for some remote, working remote, a lot of the stuff that we've been seeing online. I wasn't sure if anyone has interest in that. I know we've talked about BIM 360 and Dynamo with Civil 3D. If those are still topics that we want to try to address.
I am for that. I'm in the middle of trying to figure out BIM 360 for us. Maybe by next month's meeting, I'll have a better clue. It has not been going very quickly.
You working with Revit and MEP or Civil 3D?
Well, it's spawned from the MEP guys in Revit needing help working from home, but it's developed into both. I'm looking at it for me to work from home because my VPN sucks, and the Revit guys are hurting, but they're also just too slow to test. I think when we roll out 2021 will be a great way to test it for Civil 3D though.
Yeah, has everyone been seeing the new features available in AutoCAD and Civil 3D 2021?
I've been playing with it for about a week. Mainly, I like the multi-threaded for the pan and zoom because I've got some very large files that it makes it go a lot faster.
I just wish the whole program was multi-threaded.
Yeah, there's a lot of things in it that I could see potential for the future.
Yeah.
Like they started, but they haven't quite got there.
I think the more progress that's made in AutoCAD Core, we'll be able to port some of that into Civil 3D.
Yeah, just the loading of a large data files, if that was multi-threaded, that would help a lot.
Right. Sounds like we're about done. I'm gonna stop recording this for now then.